I'm Mike, so I'll have to make sure I don't do my best Leslie Nielsen impersonation. So I brought this balloon to just kind of show somebody an example. This would be a good, healthy ego, right? Okay, so just imagine this is my ego. I'm a pretty good guy, and I feel good about myself. So last year, I gave a presentation for this group, and I don't know. I was really nervous. I kind of blacked out. I have no idea what I said. I don't know if it was good or not. But nobody threw rocks at me when I walked out in the parking lot, so I think it must have been okay. So, this year, Jeremy kind of put out the call and said, anybody want to do another presentation? And I kind of reluctantly said, yeah, Jeremy, I'd like to. And he was like really excited. Yeah, we'd love to have you. Well, ego got a little bigger. So imagine when I got the email this past week and I looked at it and there it is. My name is number 1. Numero uno, big guys. I'm the big kahuna, okay? The guy who steps up to the plate first. And so I did what everybody does. I called my wife and I said, honey, look, read this. She looked at it for a few minutes and she said, that's great, but every music concert we've gone to, the backup band plays first. Well, there took a little bit. And then I thought for a little bit and she said, in baseball, the first guy up to the plate isn't always the best. Isn't it the fourth batter that cleans up? Went a little bit further. Then I get a message yesterday, an email yesterday from Jeremy that says, oh, by the way, hope you don't mind, but Rebecca needs a few minutes and we're putting her on first, okay? So I'm back to number 2 spot and I have to figure out how am I going to do this and do it meaningful so that you guys will actually invite me back and maybe I can move up the ranks again. So that created another dilemma. I looked at this gentleman and I said, how can I present this in a good fashion? I kept thinking. I couldn't come up with anything. Finally, I said, you know what? I got to do it. I got to think about all the great speakers that I've ever heard. And I've heard plenty of them. And maybe I can pick one and emulate them, and that'll be great. And so I said, great. Which one? Brain dead. Nothing. Can't think of anything. So a couple of days go by and I'm driving down the road and I don't know if the radio was off and it just popped on or what it was. But it came on a radio station. It was talk radio and I said, oh, got it. I remember Paul Harvey. And all you guys that are over 40 years old can remember Paul Harvey. If you're not, let me give you a brief explanation. He was an absolutely great orator. He started off in commentary, moved on. Towards the end of his career, he got into these little blips that he would do early in the morning and at noon. And he had this great voice, and it was deep, and it was reflective, and he had all the right pauses at the right time. And these little blips that he would do, it was something that you kind of knew. You knew a little bit of the background information. You knew the person involved or something like that. And he would do this cliffhanger right at the very beginning. And he would kind of suck you in and you'd be listening to it and all of a sudden he'd pause and he'd go to commercial. And he'd go, oh God, I gotta go to, come on. And you could always go to work and see somebody sitting in the car waiting. And it's like, come on, dude, we gotta go to work. No, Paul Harvey's coming on, I gotta know. And he'd always say, and the rest of the story. And so I said, you know what? This fits. This is perfect. This is exactly how to do it. So here we go. The gentleman I kind of found out about this is a guy named John Michell. Now I know there was a typo and it was all my fault. I put Mitchell. It's Michell. I call him the greatest astronomer you never heard of. Because does anybody know him? Doc? Okay, we've got one. You're a physics major, right? Okay, there it is. So keep it quiet and tell. So here's this guy in the 1700s who had all these great ideas and theories, and it was terrific. He was very well versed and came up with theories in astronomy, geology, physics, and magnetism. And this was cutting edge stuff too. In fact, a lot of it was way ahead of his contemporaries. In fact, in 1910, Sir Edmund Whittaker observed that during the century after Newton's death, so he's even putting this guy near Newton and saying the only natural philosopher of distinction who lived and taught in Cambridge was Michell. Big praise. The American Physical Society said John Michell was so far ahead of his scientific contemporaries that his ideas languished in obscurity until they were reinvented more than a century later. Again, really, really high praise. I mean, this guy came up with stuff, and 100 years later, even up to 200 years later, people were saying, hey, what about, oh, he already did it. Oh my gosh, what's the deal here? How can we do this? Now, if I were to go back in time, here's what I'd tell him. All right, guy, number one, you got to fire your press agent because they're not doing a good job, and you got to get a marketing firm in here because nobody's talking about your stuff. Come on, this is good stuff. But he seemed, and I don't know, because when I say, I looked him up on the Wikipedia page. He has a Wikipedia page. It is a page. It's not a lot for somebody who did this. But, you know, when you're looking at this kind of stuff, you think, well, you know, it's there. It's there. And the more I dug into it, you would find, you know, research and references from him from other areas and other people. Now, with all that said, and with all he's done here, he did something else that was incredibly remarkable, that every time you go out and look at the night sky and pull out your sky charts and look at it, you need to say, thanks, John, because John was responsible for that. And I'm going to tell you what that is right after this commercial. Jeremy?
Thank you, Keith. Now for this commercial announcement. Beginning now, we are going to be rolling out updates to our Astronomy Awards program, but with a twist. We are now going to be offering a mentor program where some of you more experienced guys and gals can take someone under your wing and help them along. It's a great way to recharge your batteries and to help someone learn about the hobby you love so much. And for all of you new to astronomy and the MAS, this is a great opportunity for you to learn the night sky like no one else and get some guidance from guys who have been there and done this before. We are also hoping this will develop into long-lasting friendships as you begin your journey with the MAS. So that's coming soon. Stay tuned for more, but now back to Paul.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right. John Michell. He was born Christmas Day, 1724, in Nottinghamshire, England. He was educated at Queen's College in Cambridge. Not a lot about his childhood growing up, whether or not he was a spectacular kid. It just, you know, again, one Wikipedia page, okay? He became an academic fellow at Cambridge after having multiple degrees. He was a tutor, he was a prelector and a censor, in various different subjects, in arithmetic, in theology, in geometry, in Greek, Hebrew, and philosophy. I mean, this guy is way above there. He's got me beat because he speaks multiple languages, and most people consider me not able to speak one. Here's the definition or the adjectives that associate with this guy. There is no picture of him. There's no portrait anywhere that you can be found. So he's a little short man of black complexion and fat. So that probably described a lot of people, but that was our John Michell. Now, he was nominated for rector in Bogota, Cambridge in 1760. He was a Woodwardian Chair of Geology from 1762 to 1764. Now, that's a big deal, because if you look at that, look who had to put him in that position. He had to get the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Bishop of Ely, the President of the Royal Society, the President of the College of Physicians, members of Parliament for the University of Cambridge, and the University Senate. All of them had to agree that he was the guy. Now, this is not a regular guy by any way, shape, or form. They all had to agree, and they put him in. Now, you notice he was only in there 2 years. He met someone, and he got married. And apparently, at the time, you couldn't be married and have that position. So he had to resign from the position. Now, unfortunately, there was an unfortunate tragedy. His wife died a year later. Now, she was rather wealthy, so he was pretty much finances. It wasn't anything he was thinking about. A lot of his work was done when he was at the university in his younger years, and then later in life, he started kind of experimenting more and doing a little further stuff. But big papers were written earlier. He tried to go back to Cambridge, and he wanted to get in the astronomy department, but they didn't have a place for him. They ended up giving him a rector at St. Charles Church in Thornhill in 1776. And here's where, I mean, this guy must have been not only incredibly intelligent, but must have been one of these guys that you just wanted to go have a beer with. Because if you look at the people who wrote letters to him, it was astounding. His best friend was Cavendish. Okay? Benjamin Franklin wrote letters to him and came over to spend weeks of time with him just to talk. And yet, how many people in this room knew who John Michell is? We've got one guy in the back of the room. All right, so let's talk about his scientific work. In geology and seismology, he wrote a paper called Conjectures Concerning the Cause and Observations Upon Phenomena of Earthquakes, in which he considered the 1755 Lisbon earthquake. What he was saying is that earthquakes have an epicenter, and gravity and the waves of that spread out. So the damage may not be where the epicenter is. It's somewhere else. And he could actually, by that study of the Lisbon earthquake, pinpoint exactly where the epicenter was. He was also the first guy to say a tsunami is caused by an earthquake deep below the sea. No one else had ever come up with that before. They thought, oh my gosh, it's happening on land, this must be where it was. But no. Then you flip over, and in the area of magnetism, he discovered the inverse square law of magnets, and that's the mathematical equation of how the North Pole and the South Pole, you know, when you try to get together as a kid and you put them together and they don't go, well, there's a mathematical equation to how that works. He, in his 1750 paper on the treaties of artificial magnets, he taught people how to make magnets. Before that, they were just going around finding rocks that were magnetized and using those rocks. He showed them how to do it. And he did it for sailors, because he figured sailors were out there, they needed some way to figure out how to get a magnet done, and they were on water. They can't stop and pull over and say, hey, our compass broke, we got to find a magnet here somewhere. In gravity, he devised a torsion balance for measuring the mass of the Earth. He died, unfortunately, before it was actually made. Cavendish made it and gave 100% credit to Michell. And said, he did it, I made it, but here it is. A.H. Cook said the most important advance in experiments on gravitation and other delicate instruments was the introduction of torsion balance by Michell and its current use by Cavendish. It has been the basis of all the most significant experiments on gravitation ever since, and one guy in this room knows who he is. One guy. Now, in astronomy, this is where we're all here for, right? This is where he really shined, all right? He was the first guy to come up and say there's such a thing as double stars and binaries. And he used a new science of mathematics called statistics. Nobody had used it before. And he used it to determine that there were many more stars that occurred in groups and pairs than were just by random. And he was saying that they're here and they're together and they're binaries because of the gravity between the two of them. The gravity is pulling them together, and that's what's happening. He also talked about Pleiades. Now, you guys all know Pleiades, the little dipper we all look at every night in the sky, the one up here, not the one over here. Not the one to the north, right, Doc? The one up straight. Anyway, he was saying that without that gravitational pull between these stars, the likelihood of that grouping being together was 1 in 500 million chances. And sure enough, he's right. And the thing that will eventually pull Pleiades apart is gravity from other sources. And eventually it'll happen. Black holes, first guy who ever thought about it. He even postulated that when a sun, or if a sun, would be 500 times massive of our sun, its gravity would be so great that the light molecules and particles couldn't approach escape velocity to get away. And sure enough, that's a black hole. And it was not until 1970 when somebody came back and said, oh my gosh, the paper was already written 200 years ago. There it is. He also said, as far as black holes, is that if you're looking at a star and it's not acting right, it's acting like there are two stars and the gravity is pulling, there could potentially be a black star there. So if there's a single star and it's kind of not working the way it should, look for something else. In telescopes, made his own. Okay? He actually constructed for his own use a 30-inch aperture with a 10-inch focal length. And so, Jeremy, I think that's slightly bigger than yours, right?
I think so. It's fast.
Now, all this to the guy's credit. And I'm telling you, he did one other thing that was remarkable. And what did he do? Well, turns out he also loved music. And he was an amateur violinist. He met a guy in the same city who was an organist. And he introduced him to astronomy, just like all of you can do when we go out on these outings and we introduce people to astronomy. And that introduction, and I guarantee you, it doesn't say anywhere, but if you look back and think about his history and the fact that he was a tutor and he was a mentor, I'm sure he didn't just invite this guy over to look through his telescope and that was it. See you later, buddy. Talk to you later. I'll bet you he said, let me show you. Let me show you. Let me take you to the next step. Okay? Now, the reason this is so important is because that organist was William Herschel. NGC catalog, that's the guy who brought his sister into being one of the first and most famous female astronomers. He's brought his son in, wrote the catalog, did the whole thing. Here's my question to all of you. Without John Michell, would we have William Herschel? Maybe not. And think of that, all that stuff. Every time you go out and you open those star charts and look, you got to think back. It's John Michell and his work. Now you know the rest of the story. But I'm not leaving it there. I'm not Paul Harvey, so I'm going one step further. We're talking about the Mass Awards program. And I want to think about the Mass Awards program a little bit different. So, how many people have done the awards program or something, or some part of them, or things like, right? Great. How many haven't done them? Everybody else, okay? So all you other people, here and here and here, there's your mentors. So here's what I'm proposing, and it's okay for all those people that we bump into all the time at star parties, and we introduce them and we say, hey, look through. How many of those people are we missing? So the next step is, how do you educate those people when they come in and they look through the telescope and they say, wow, never knew that was there. Great. We can leverage our award ceremony. You don't have to call it an award ceremony. You can call it anything you want. But it's got a great list. John has done an absolutely wonderful job of going through that, putting everything together, and it's a pick-off. Here, 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 and here. I'm proposing that what we have is a mentor program. I'll be happy to put a mentor with a newbie and say, okay, look, I'm not saying you have to spend, 5 nights a week talking to the person or anything like that. I mean, it could be an email once every 3 or 4 weeks. Heck, the way it is right now, nobody's been able to look at the sky for the last 4 months anyway, so you had 4 months off. But just to be able to tell that person, okay, look, here's the program, here's how you walk through it, and let me know. I'm going to be at the dark side, or I'm going to be here. If you want to look through my scope, or swing by, and you got any questions, and we can sit down and we'll point them out to you, and we'll see how it goes. So that's what I'm saying is let's not overlook the William Herschels we've got out there, and let's go after those people. Thank you.